This is Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur with your host, Lynn Freest. Lynn will share ideas and expert advice from people that are walking in your shoes and living their encore careers, where they want and at the pace they want. You'll start a company of one with confidence and knowledge to live a fulfilled life of freedom and ease. Lynn is a coach and leadership consultant whose mission is to show senior leaders and experts how to start something refreshing and new after a full career in the corporate environment.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the podcast, Creating Your Encore Career and Becoming a Silver Entrepreneur. As always, I want to thank you for spending your valuable time with me, and I'm sure you'll get something out of this particular interview. This episode is Running Your Own Business with Kevin Karschnik. In making the leap from being a corporate leader and expert into becoming a solopreneur, it can be daunting, but the rewards are great. You can work when you want, where you want, and do the work you love. And I can be that guide and thinking partner for you. As your coach, I'll help you go farther and faster based on what I've learned from being on this journey for several years. If you're even having any thoughts about starting an encore career, please contact me and take the self-assessment quiz. The quiz will help you get some quick clarity around what's possible for you in the future. And after you listen to the podcast, I encourage you to visit my website at lynnfreest.com and download a PDF as a guide to help you take your next steps on the pursuit of your encore career. Today, we're going to be talking with Kevin Karschnik. Kevin delivers high-energy, high-impact speeches and training workshops that help business professionals with the leadership and communication skills that they need to succeed in today's complex business climate. Kevin is a successful entrepreneur whose professional career spans over 30 years and includes starting and selling $2 million training companies. Kevin is also the co-author of a popular business book, Corporate Ovations. So some of the topics we're going to cover today are why he left the business behind that he had in fact started. What are some of the lessons he's learned in creating now 3 businesses? Why you should plan on spending 12 to 18 months building your business. And then how he uses LinkedIn to both connect with possible clients and to connect with business peers as he has his individual company. Well, welcome, Kevin. It's great to have you on the show. I really appreciate you taking your time to share your story with my audience. And to do that, I think we'll just start off. If you can tell us about your journey, what you've been doing, and where you are today and what you're up to.
Appreciate the invitation, Lynn. My journey started when I graduated college in 1990, and my very first job was at Dell, selling computers. But deep down, I'd always wanted to start my own company. I knew that there was an entrepreneur in me, and it was at 10 years old selling lemonade on the corner. It was starting a bike business and a balloon business, a balloon delivery service in college. So I knew the entrepreneur was in me. But my dad had said it was important for me to have a corporate job. And so I worked at Dell for a year in sales. Call after call. This is 1990. Call after call. People were buying computers from me, but also asking this question, how do I use this thing? And so guess what? That entrepreneur in me kept coming up with these questions of there might be a business here. We could teach people how to use these computers. And so I called up my friend who was graduating a year after me, my best friend since 10 years old, and said, hey, Russ, let's start a company. And we started a business called Future Tech Training. And I quit my job at Dell after a year. And we started teaching people in the transition how to use Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Windows 3.0, if you can remember that. And it was really awesome because our very first customer was Dell right after I quit, but maybe a month or two after.
Now, that's interesting. You're hired by the people that trained you, huh?
And it was interesting because I wanted to move into the learning and development area, but they wouldn't let me transfer. So I ended up leaving, and then they ended up hiring me back. But that was the start of it. And the interesting thing about starting your own business, and I was 22 years old. I thought I knew everything and realized very, very quickly I knew nothing. But you had to learn all of it. You had to learn everything about starting a business. And I don't think there was a better way to start my career. I'd had some sales training from Dell, but I had to learn the technology. I truly didn't know how to use the computers. So we had to buy every book we could, took every class that we could to learn how to use all of the things that we were going to turn around and teach. And you might question a 22-year-old, two 22-year-olds trying to teach adults, but they didn't question us because they thought we were the geniuses that knew this new up-and-coming computer. And so we had to learn the technology. We had to learn how to sell, how to market, how to service our customers. And probably the biggest challenge for me was the financial side, just learning about the invoicing and the collections and how to balance your checkbook when it comes to running your business. And then it was a couple of years after, as we started to grow, and we eventually had 30 employees in 3 cities, Austin, Houston, and Dallas. We started in Austin, Texas. Had to learn leadership, how to lead people. So those first 8 years of starting my first business, that was just like drinking from a fire hose, just learning about every aspect of starting a business.
Wow. Yeah. And it's never over, I guess. I'm sure you're even learning today. But on the other hand, it was a big intensive that you got yourself through and were successful.
Became the foundation of everything. And yes, you never stop learning. And then once you think you've learned it, there's always something else that's changed or something new to learn, whether that's a new marketing strategy, a sales strategy, or even just now learning how to deliver and how to facilitate, because knowing the technology and being able to teach or facilitate, those are 2 totally different things as well.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that, especially for my audience that are people who are, quote, known experts in their field or their careers, but they maybe haven't had to go out and present their knowledge or, those kinds of things. So this would be something where this will be a new skill that they'll have to learn that you found out that you did too.
Absolutely. Now, for me, again, the luck of this in the first 8 years of our business was we were teaching 200 days a year. And so you're in the classroom. And so you get to learn from a lot of mistakes and you get to, over time, get better and better. And so that was a big part of it. But for those that are going to be branching out, and yes, there is a gap of how do I learn to get comfortable standing up and presenting in front of people? And I say there's kind of 3 pieces of it, and you're the third. The first is learning to present. And that's you standing in front of a group of people, presenting information. The second is facilitating. And that's another new skill, which is that's push and pull. You're not just pushing information, but you're pulling it from your audience. And then that third piece, I call it conversational, which is what you've mastered, being able to run a podcast and have these just conversations with people. And those are 3 different skills. And just because somebody might be an outgoing person or somebody who has a lot of knowledge doesn't make them good in those 3 areas.
Yeah. Recently, we heard somebody describe it as they were a situational extrovert. They said normally they're an introvert, but they could speak in front of a group. But they said it was purely situational.
I love that. I can relate to that because people think that, oh, you're outgoing, you must be really good in front of people. That's not true. And it is a skill. It is something that you have to practice, and you do have to, I'm going to say, get up for it when you go to teach a class or when you go to present. And it doesn't mean that you can't be an introvert the rest of the time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So what was the next thing on your journey?
Well, as that business started to grow, and this was 1997, we met every year. So it was 3 business partners. So my business partner and I had brought on a third partner. And the reason that we did that was as we expanded and we were in Austin, Houston, and Dallas, it just made sense to have somebody who was an owner running their city. It was really hard to have an employee. Not that it wasn't possible, but it just made it easier. And it was also a fraternity brother of mine. So the 3 of us were working together. We met every year to come up with strategies and to think about what our goals were for the next year. That was something that we had done right from the very, very beginning. And it was 1997. It was the end of the year. And we were starting to make plans for 98. And one of the topics that came up was everybody's using Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. People are now comfortable using a mouse. And believe it or not, they weren't back in 1990 and 1991. They didn't know how to. And we started to see the writing on the wall that this was a skill that our kids were going to be able to learn before they ever got out of school. And so we started to think about if the right situation, if the right opportunity presented itself, we'd be willing to sell our business. And by just opening that door, and I think sometimes it's just being open to those ideas. It was June of 1998. We were approached by a national training company called Knowledge Alliance that had no presence in Texas, and they would be able to come in by us and have a presence in Austin, Houston, and Dallas. And so that transition happened. And I was so excited. The 3 of us were so excited. I think we're 28, 29 years old. And they bought us for $1 million. And we were thinking, oh my gosh, we're rich. Until you take that $1 million, divide it by 3 partners, take out taxes. And then we all realized we got to go get a real job now. And so that transition took me to the next 5 years where I had two jobs. I was at a startup for about 2.5 years. And then I was at Dell, went back to Dell for 2.5 years. And so got go back into working for somebody else. And I needed the break right after. I would say I was exhausted. The journey, the 7 to 8 year journey of building up that business and then selling that business, it wears on you. And I'm sure that you've had listeners in the past and you've had some of your interviews in the past that they have just said it just wears on you mentally, physically. Have you run into that with some of those?
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes I'll say it either wears on them or they've just lost the spark. If you've had 20, 30 years doing something, sometimes the spark isn't there anymore and you get a little dissatisfied. Even if you're good at it, you're a little dissatisfied kind of doing stuff over and over again.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's absolutely the longevity of that, the timing of it. And then for us, it was the intensity of it for 7 or 8 years. And there was no vacations. And I hate to say that, but there was no work-life balance. And we weren't using the term back then, but it was burnout. It was burnout of just day after day and dealing with just the next fire. And whether that was a client who maybe paid a little late and all of a sudden that impacted payroll, to trainers that might not have shown up to teach a class, or dealing with just all the issues that you would deal with as a manager of a business. And so it did wear on you. And so I needed the break. And it was a nice break to go to a startup where I wasn't in charge. Mm-hmm. And then it was an interesting transition for me to go back to a bigger business. Dell at this point was significantly bigger, now officially a Fortune 50 company, and to really understand and learn how they were running their business. But the entire time I was getting the itch again about wanting to go back and starting a business. I knew it wasn't going to be in the same area we were. We were teaching technology, and that changed and evolved. I wanted to go to something more on the soft skill side. And so I reached out to my best friend, Russ, again and said, "Are you ready?" And he was working for a company called CSC. And we decided in 2015 to start a new company called I Speak. And originally, we were going to be very focused on teaching people how to present. We had a lot of experience doing that in our first business. But, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners might relate to this, we started down that path without a lot of customers. People were like, "Well, but do you have something on team building? Do you have something on time management? We're looking for this class on customer service. Do you guys have that?" So guess what we did that first 2-3 years of that new business? Started to say yes to everything. And before you knew it, we were the company that was a little bit of everything, but not great at anything. And so if you needed a time management class, we helped you. Customer service, team building, even some leadership classes, and drizzled in a few presentation skills, which is where we wanted to go. The big lesson in that second company was we, number one, didn't want to grow fast. We learned that having 30 employees took us to a place we didn't want. So we were going to be super selective about how we grew. We grew very small and very strategic. And the second thing was we 2 years in, learned we had to learn how to say no. And about that time is when we shifted our business completely to saying we are only going to be presentation skills and something that has to do with standing and speaking, whether that's public speaking or facilitating. But that was going to be our focus. And we had a lot of areas we could branch into, from teaching people how to present, teaching people how to tell stories, teaching people how to think on their feet. Leader presence, executive presence was another big topic.
Sure.
So those are a bunch of lessons that we learned there.
Yeah. And that's interesting too, because again, you know all these things, but like you said, the sharper your focus, the more in depth you can go with people and both develop yourself and the audience you're looking at. So.
Well, I think sometimes people look at us when we're starting a company and they're like, "Well, what are you? What is your company?" And when you're too many things, then they say, "Well, that's not what we're looking for." If we're looking for a particular service, or if you're looking for, let's say, my hot water heater went out last winter. I'm not looking for the generalist person to come in. I'm looking for somebody who focuses on plumbing, specifically if they focus on hot water heaters. And so we learned that in the training business, that the more focused we could be, that we weren't losing out on customers. We were actually attracting more and more people that were in the space that we wanted. And unfortunately, it took us too long to learn that. It took us 2-3 years to really get down that path. But once we did, and I'm sure some of your listeners can relate to that, that's when you start to really find your groove, because you're now known for that. You can start to focus on that. All the articles I read, all the books I read, all the classes I took were now all focused in that one area.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I know colleagues and stuff that have started their business, and almost invariably they say once they narrowed their focus, the business got better. because people knew what they were buying. And as well as the owner, whatever, you got better at telling people your value proposition.
Yeah, it makes it easier to tell your story. And I think when people go to our websites, they should be able to very quickly see this is what this person focuses on. This is what their specialty is. And even if sometimes I've seen it on some people's sites that they don't really have that banner that really says this is what my specialty is. And I think sometimes we're afraid to say we specialize in an area, thinking we're going to lose out on business. But I think, as we've said, the opposite's true.
Yeah, I have a guy I've followed, Donald Miller, who talks about marketing and stuff, especially internet. And he says, your website should have one sentence of what you do and a button that says, buy now. He says, otherwise you just confuse people and you'll lose them.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree with that. Yeah, it's got to be simple. It's got to be clear, because as soon as we start to create confusion in the consumer's eyes, it's easy for them to move on. Hit that back button on the internet search and go to the next one.
Yeah. So you're continuing on to grow this business. What happens next then?
Yeah, so we just slowly started to build up 7, 8, 9 employees. And for me, it started to fall back into that trap again, I'm going to say, of doing the same thing, 15 years, 16 years now of doing it, and starting to see some of that repetition. And I think we did a much, much better job of taking time off. Mm-hmm. In the training worlds, we can take time off during holidays. People aren't usually training about mid-December to early January, and any major holiday, those are usually a few days off. So we did a good job of balancing it. But I think also the idea that we were still managing people, and there was just this part of me, and I use this term ikigai that maybe some of your listeners can relate to. And ikigai is really your purpose for living. It is, I'm going to call it your sweet spot. And it is the combination of 3 areas. It is something that you love to do. It is something that you're good at doing. And it is something that people are willing to pay you for. That's your ikigai. And I started to realize for me that my ikigai was out of balance, and that I wasn't loving what I was doing as much as I did. And so I really had to do some soul searching and said, what is it that I'm passionate about? What is it that I love to do? And so I made a decision. It was probably the hardest business decision I'd ever made. And that was to leave this second company after 16 years. This was in the pandemic year, 2020, and decided to start my own business. I worked for 1 year as a transition to my business partner, Russ, who we were still working together. We've been friends now for over 40 years. And then this year, January 2021, was the start of my new business called Key Points 3, and decided to go a solo venture, still training, couldn't teach the presentation skills from our previous company for non-compete purposes. So I chose to teach people about positivity, which I'm very, very passionate about, and leadership, which I now have 30 years experience in leading companies, small companies, and as well as even at my time at Dell. So I decided to make that change. And here's an interesting thing. I've told people always have asked me over the years since we've started multiple businesses, tell me how you do it. What do you do? How do you get started? I've been wanting to leave my corporate business and wanted to do something on my own. And I tell them, I go, plan for 18 months. It is an 18-month transition. Save the money. If you have a certain financial goal, I'm going to use easy math here. You need to make $50,000 a year. Then you better set aside $75,000 into a bank account that you could just tap into as your salary for the next year and a half, because that's about how long it takes to kind of get your business up and running. And it's going to start super slow and you'll see little ups and downs, and it's going to take 18 months. But deep down, I said, I've done this. I could do it so much faster than 18 months. And I think that was probably the hardest transition for me, was to realize, no, it's still going to take 12 to 18 months. And the first 3-4 months of starting a business were so hard for me, because we went from going 100 miles an hour. And I'm sure you've got listeners, maybe you can even relate to that when you left your corporate job, that you went from 100 emails a day, meetings back to back to back, travel, sprinkled in, to literally nothing on January 1st. And having to start with a brand new schedule with 0 emails coming in and 0 people that know what you do and what you're going to be doing. So that part was hard. What about you for your transition, leaving corporate to saying, I want to start my own thing?
The same thing happened. And I'd been thinking about it for a while. So at least had done some of the thinking and a little bit of the planning. But yeah, what I failed to understand was the strength of the habits that I had in the corporate world. So all of a sudden, whether I liked the structure or not, I had structure to my day. And now all of a sudden I could spend all day looking at Facebook, and that was fine for me because I didn't, but I quickly realized, okay, I'm going to have to start building some new habits, putting some new routines back in here to try to, again, pull myself back. The other thing is that I failed to know was how much I depended on the network of people. Again, whether I really liked them or not, I was used to being immersed in a network of people in the company, and now all of a sudden, what I did do, and I did it, I think intentionally, was got connected with other groups of people, in this case, mainly entrepreneurs, people who are building businesses, maybe not anything like mine, but people who are on a similar journey. So that has helped me a whole lot going forward, is to reconnect with people that are on a similar path to yours going forward.
Yeah, whether that's joining an organization or whether that's just a monthly meeting, a weekly meeting with somebody that's like-minded, different businesses altogether, but just to be able to share ideas and to keep each other accountable. And whether it was being on Facebook all day or whether just starting your own business, and whether you spend, the first week working on marketing, and whether you spend another week working on sales and then another week working on service. And all of a sudden you're like, I've got to figure out a balance of how to get my business up and running. And I've got to create my LLC. I've got to get my bank account, my finances in order. I've got to get my marketing. I've got to get a website. I've got to get, and you start to go through the list of all the things that you have to do. And there's a long list. And I like the idea that you said about having done the planning before you leave, because that's key. You can't sit there and spend the first 3 months trying to say, what am I going to do? And what's my new business going to be? Because that valuable time can be done in the evenings after your day job, so that you can do a better job of what I'm going to say, hit the ground and run, versus having to spend all that time planning, because that planning time also is costing money that you're not out selling and actually delivering the services that you want to do.
And I'll say the one thing that I probably noticed, and I just rebranded my work this last year, starting officially in July, although it started a little before that. But I went from teaching manufacturing leadership to this encore career thing, helping people who want to leave corporate careers. And I realized after I got started, I got to find a whole new group of clients. It's an entirely different client base in many respects, and I really have to go back and spend that 2 hours a day on marketing and connecting with the people who I want to reach now versus all the people I've met over the previous 5 years in manufacturing. Some of them might be interested, but that's not really where my core audience is now.
So finding that group, again, going back to that, and I think LinkedIn has been a big part for me, understanding that there are so many connections to make there. And so finding who either, I'm going to say, like-minded people to connect with on LinkedIn and having just conversations like you do so well, or whether it is those potential customers that we are going to reach out to. So knowing those titles. So making a list of learning and development, talent development, and being able to make those searches and the areas, the demographics that you're looking for, and then making those connections and reaching out. For me, on the association side, I want to go to that because I think that's where you also meet the people that are either in the same industry or the people that maybe are your customers. So for me in my business, it was National Speakers Association, NSA, and then ATD, the Association of Talent and Development, and being able to be a part of those. So joining those immediately, I joined both of those organizations earlier this year. And then here's been my best part. The last 6 months of this year have been really beneficial for me as I've donated my time doing free sessions, free classes that I teach, 1 hour webinars for ATD. And how that's been so helpful is, A, I'm in front of all of my peers. I'm in front of all of my potential customers, and I'm donating my time. So if somebody hears and sees me and they're like, wow, that was a really good session. I delivered one called Positivity Under Pressure. And I got 3 leads from it, all from doing a free session. So LinkedIn, joining associations, giving back to some extent where you know that the people that you potentially want to work with will be there. Those are the things that can help you grow your business. I'll use my son as an example. He's 23 and he just passed his CFP, his Certified Financial Planner exam. And I've been talking to him about going to the Lions Club and the Rotary Club. And I said, every one of these organizations have meetings, usually morning lunch or sometimes after hours. And I said, they're always looking for speakers. They don't want sales pitches. They want content. They want good information. So he could go in for a 30-minute presentation and teach about a Roth IRA or teach about the ins and outs of a 401k or what a retirement strategy might look like. And maybe, again, potentially somebody sees and hears him and says, wow, this, I always say kid, he's 23. This kid really knows what he's talking about. I want to reach out to him and see if he can help me with my financial plan. So these are just ideas that I hope some of your listeners can benefit from.
I always remember on the financial side, and this has been 20 years ago, but there was a guy who became successful at that. They asked him what he did. He says, I drive through all those areas of town where industries are, and they're not very fancy, and they're not very flashy, but all these guys that own machine shops, they all have $1 million around somewhere. He says, that's where I really got my best clients from, rather than, going to the financial places. No, I look through where the people are actually doing the work.
Well, I think that brings up another interesting point, though. I mean, I'll tell you another sweet spot that we found in the training business, and I'm doing it now for my business, is not going after all of the big names. So the Facebook that you mentioned, and Coca-Cola and John Deere and all these big names that are out there, instead of going after all those, guess what? So's everybody else. We went down a notch. And I say my sweet spot was between 3,000 and 30,000 employees. Mm-hmm. It was kind of the notch below it, because those folks weren't being called on as regularly as those big ones. So the point you bring up is a good one. So know your audience and really understand what it is that they need and who fits your clientele.
Sure. Yeah. And I think of, again, people like yourself, myself, the corporate experts that want to go into something on their own. The big guys, they need big companies to work with. Whereas some of these others, they don't have, 3,000 people, 30,000 people. They don't have a huge HR or training department. They need to hire people to come in with those experiences that, and I'm sure just as you found, you can get a lot of traction there.
Yeah. Well, and I think transparency is key. I think for my business today, I mean, I'm being very clear about, hey, it is just me. When you schedule me on April 15th, I'm blocked. I'm yours. And I'm not going to, sign up another client another day and try to go to a contractor to deliver that session. So I think that transparency, I think people appreciate that, and they know that they're getting you. They know they're working with you. And so people, I think, are sometimes afraid to sit here and say, it's just me. And I do think there's that company that says, no, that's what we're looking for. We want to be able to work with somebody that we know, somebody that we can trust. And for me, transparency, being authentic about it all is going to be key.
Oh, absolutely. I have a good friend who just did a book called You Are the Brand, but one of his key ideas in there is sales is about opening a relationship, not closing a sale. That whole idea of you're out there opening relationships with people is what your goal should be.
No, and you never know. Sometimes a relationship's not going to go anywhere other than just you've established a great relationship. And maybe, whether that's next month or next year or never, that person refers you over to somebody else. So I love that. That's the foundation of all business, is creating great relationships and maintaining those relationships. So that's where those, again, going back to the organizations and associations and LinkedIn comes in, and stay active in those as we're building and maintaining those relationships.
Sure. And I could see, so for example, if somebody had a specialty in logistics or whatever it might be in their corporate world that they wanted to go out and share individually, well, as anything, go find out where those people hang out, and do your best to be there. And
give back. I mean, whether that's a 1 hour webinar, I mean, to be able to share some knowledge on a 1 hour webinar, and obviously there's going to be more depth than a 1 hour webinar from any subject matter expert, but that gets your name out there. It gets people to get a sense of what you do. And so to be able to do that, I mean, I think my strategy for next year, or the second week of January, I have 6 1 hour webinars scheduled with different companies. And I reached out to my contacts through ATD and then through LinkedIn and said, I'd like to offer your company a free 1 hour webinar called Positivity Under Pressure. Mm-hmm. And you can invite up to 100 folks to attend it. And I scheduled 6 of them for that second week of January. And it's costing me nothing but a few hours of my time that week. It's the program I like to teach and gets my foot in the door. Absolutely. Yeah. And some of that is always, I know they've talked about it on LinkedIn and stuff too, is it's not your contacts, it's the people that they know that'll actually get you work eventually. So it's, can you be mentioned or mentionable? Yeah. And finding, I'm going to say, just that traction within a company, because there is a momentum that once you're in there and somebody's like, wow, that was really good. And then they bring you in, and next thing you know, the momentum really picks up. The buzz, I like to call it. I have a good friend that's taught for 20 years now, has taught a course on conversational skills. And he said, I never had to advertise it or whatever. Just
for 20 years and you taught over 400 of these classes, just word of mouth kept building in the company. So, like you say, yeah.
Check all the boxes of everything we've just been talking about to where you deliver a great session, you do some great customer service afterwards, you maintain those great relationships. And then it really does feel like you've never had to sell because the word just keeps getting out. That's awesome.
So thinking back here a little bit on, we've talked about the content and things, thinking again about process, especially as you started this last company with just you, what are some of the things, did you have to learn any new skills, or did you, from your previous companies, pretty much have all the quote business or process skills you needed, or what have you found as you just got started?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest challenge was the idea that I had to not do what I'd been doing for 16 years, which was teaching presentation skills and facilitation skills. And so one of the first challenges that I did was I reached out to every contact I could find. I think I talked to over 75 different people at different companies and just started asking them about what is it that you're wanting? What is it that you're looking for? Are there any gaps in your training plans? And they started giving me different topics. And I heard things like resilience. I heard things like positivity and tons of different topics on leadership. And so I just gathered this list, started checking off the things that I felt like I was most passionate about. And from there, started building content. So I think the biggest challenge was identifying topics and then having to build these new curriculum, whether it was a 1 hour, 3 hour, or 7 hour workshop, or now I'm also doing, and I'm going to say dabbling in the keynote speaking world where a conference is looking for a speaker. And it's just, again, what I've learned, very different contacts. You mentioned it with your business. All the learning and development directors that I've known and work with over the years, they're not the ones that are hiring for a conference. They're not the ones, wanting to look for a keynote speaker. So new titles, new contacts, and new content is what I've really learned for this year. And just the struggle of what it takes to start a business. And I was 6 months into this year, and I'll be totally transparent. I think I was at like $20,000 in sales through June, and questioning whether or not I was doing the right thing and whether I'd made the right move and whether I was headed in the right direction. And I'm sure you're going to have some listeners that have made the transition or are making it or thinking about it. And
yeah.
I think when you go in with the mindset that it is going to take 12 to 18 months and there's no overnight success, that it will help you get through the bumps like I felt in May, June, when I was questioning whether or not I was even doing the right thing.
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the things I volunteered in the past was we have a program locally that we do for companies that want to do this lean startup system. And one of the key elements of that, in fact, most of the program is going out and doing customer discovery interviews. And we tell all these people, I don't care how good you think your idea is, you need to talk to between 60 and 100 people to see what they need. You said it was about 75 conversations, but that's where the magic starts to happen. You get enough data there that says, this is a focused theme that I'm hearing a lot about. So
yeah, I just made a note of that. I love that, the customer discovery conversation. I don't think those ever stop. I feel like, here I am at the end of the year and I'm still having those conversations with clients simply because there might be something new that's going to be opening up next year. And again, having a good focus as to where you want to be is going to be key, and learning where to say no. I had an opportunity, and this was probably the hardest thing. I said no to an opportunity for next year that probably would have been very lucrative. It was outside of where I wanted to specialize in. And I just had this fear that because it was so lucrative that my focus would have shifted to this new area that I'd already decided that wasn't where I wanted to be. And it wasn't where I wanted to go. And I'll tell you, it's hard to say no when you're starting a business because the revenue is usually pretty low getting started. And so those are some skills that people are going to struggle with.
Sure. You mentioned the speaking business. I have a good friend that she's been in the HR speaking business for over 10 years, does it quite well. Had a tough year in 2020, but it was always interesting because, again, she decided what she wanted in life. So she wanted to be a speaker, but she also wanted to travel. So all of a sudden she was deciding, okay, I'll take this opportunity in Australia, or I'll take this opportunity, even if it's not the most financially rewarding, because I want to see these places. She could make more money by, sticking in the US and doing the big conferences. But she says, no, that's the other thing I want to fulfill my life with, is getting some travel in.
Well, I think that perfectly aligns with the Encore career. And one of the things that I know was important to me, I've got a speaking opportunity in March, in York, Pennsylvania. And I'd never been there. And I did some quick searching and found that Hershey, Pennsylvania was right there. Told my wife we'd never been there. And so we're going to make a 3-day trip out of it. So I'm going to be teaching for a half day, and we're going to spend 2 days visiting the area of Hershey, Pennsylvania. And I think that's part of the Encore career. It's not being, I've got to get back and go to the next thing. It's, no, let me expand that trip. Yes, I might miss out on an opportunity to come do another class, but it's going to really give me that balance to where my wife can come on a trip with me. We can really do a better job of balancing work and fun.
Yeah, I always like to say people that hopefully in the Encore career, and this goes back to your 3 things, but also work where you want, work when you want, and do the work you love. That's kind of how people are starting to think once they have an Encore career. They often have, again, some financial things that are kind of a foundation that they'd like to build off of, but they've got a little flexibility there. So it's important to, as you said, not to get yourself into running a 30-person company again, kind of by accident.
Yeah, and it was twice, I would say, by accident. But to know the financial goals, I think that's another part of it. I think when we finally sat down and said, all right, what do we have to make during this Encore career to sustain the lifestyle that we want with the savings that we've got? I'm going to say 15 years away from retirement. And even in the job I do, and similar to what you're doing, I don't know if I would ever really retire. I love what I do, and I might slow down even more significantly more than what I'm going to be doing here for the next few years, but I don't think I'll ever stop. But to know the financial goals and to say, I don't need to make $500,000 as my small business this year. If I just maintained 100,000, or if I just maintained 50,000, that would be enough for me to not have to tap into my retirement money, but also maintain, some relevance into the corporate world or some, fulfillment on doing this thing that I've always wanted to do. And I can say I've talked to so many different folks in the corporate businesses that have always said deep down, I've always wanted to go do something on my own.
Yeah, I interviewed a guy a while back, Mark Miller, he does also teach people about Encore careers, but he took another step and said, he and his wife moved to Mexico. So now they have a very minimal living expense. They have affordable health care, all of that, and they enjoy where they live. But, moved from Austin, Texas to a community in Mexico. For him, it works,
That's knowing what you want. It's going back to, saying we're open to that travel, or we're open to living on less income that we were used to. And I think that's another part of leaving a corporate job and leaving all the benefits if you're okay with the fact that I know I'm going to make less money and I know I'm paying full price for my health insurance and I now have to manage my own retirement fund, that those are the things that we deal with. And as long as you can live with that and not have that, I'm going to say, jealousy of somebody else who's still at the corporate business, or some resentment or some second thoughts about whether I made the right choice.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's an individual choice, but often I've seen people who are even much older than I am, as they get into their 80s and stuff, they consciously downsize their needs as they go along, and mainly by choice. They just say 2-bedroom house is big enough. We don't need 4 bedrooms and 3-car garage anymore, those kinds of things. Well, I think sometimes as you start an Encore career, you may also be at that point where one guy, I just read a book. He has a book called The Portfolio Life. He says, I upscaled my lifestyle and downscaled my life expenses. So
I love it. But that's all part of planning. That's all part of knowing what you want to do when you do leave that corporate job to go start something. This is what I want to do, and this is where I want to be, and this is the expenses that we're going to have. And having a really good grasp of that is going to help somebody also be successful.
Sure.
I think being unrealistic that, we're going to be able to live on $30,000 a year when you're used to living on $130,000, that's a really big change. And what I would tell somebody like that is you've got to work downwards towards that. See what it's like to have 1 car instead of 2 cars.
Yeah.
It made sense in the planning stages until reality kicked in, and there's only 1 car in the house now.
Yeah, a lot of these things, you certainly need a common ground with your spouse on these things.
Yep.
But
that's a huge piece of this, is having the support from your family. There's no way. I'm going to rewind back to the second company we started. And there's no way I could have left Dell, my corporate job at Dell, to start another business when we had 2 kids under the age of 5. We had a mortgage. We had 2 car payments. That was the hardest business to start because it was going to be an outlay of think we'd said we put in about $75,000. And that was a big chunk of our retirement that we had decided to take out to go do this, and a risk that may not have paid off. So to have the support of my wife to say, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to set aside this money. We're going to give it 18 months and see if it works. And if not, you'll go back to your corporate job. And then even now in this change, I always said to my wife, I said, during this last change, I said, I need your support that I'm not going to be as busy. I'm not going to be traveling as much, and I'm not going to be making as much money as I've made. And I didn't want to feel the guilt of I'm not, doing what I used to do. And I think that support within the family is going to be key.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, one of the things is my transition from corporate life to running my business from home was my wife had to get used to me being around more. And that, even that simple thing, like you say, just you're in my way kind of a thing.
I think everybody's dealt with that over the last 2 years with the pandemic of now we're all on top of each other and having the right working space and just having schedules that work out to where, hey, I'm going to be on a call and I can't have the dog barking or I can't have the kids sitting on my lap while I'm on a Zoom call. Yeah,
that, for people that want to do this kind of thing now, obviously, we all got a taste of it during the last year or two, how this could work. So I think more people think it's possible now, whether it be in the companies or be in the individuals. One other thing I thought was interesting, and I wanted to circle back, it probably hasn't happened much in many cases, but the fact you went back to work for a company. And I think that may happen more often in the future going forward, that people circle back. Because one, there's talent shortage, but you could redefine where you're going to work, who you're going to work for, how much you're going to work, but you could just go back and get another job too. It'll just be probably under different circumstances.
Yeah, I always want to say never, because once you're down that entrepreneurial path, you might sit there and go, all right, I would never go back, to work for a company. Or once you start working at home, it's like, I'll never go back into an office. And I just said, be careful that you never say never, because maybe circumstances change. And maybe it's a health circumstance where it's like, I really need that corporate insurance that I can't get on my own. Or maybe I really need the matching 401k combined with that. And that's going to be a reason. But also to what you just said is we come back with a little bit of better terms saying, listen, I'm only going to be able to go into the office 3 days a week. I'm only looking to work to where I don't travel, or I'm only, I need a job where they do the 980 where you work 9 days and 80 hours or 8 days and 80 hours. So you're working longer days, but you've got longer weekends every other weekend.
Sure.
So I think there's definitely some of those things. And I think companies are being more open to that, to say, we need to bring the talent in. And the only way we're going to get the talent is to be more flexible in how we offer the benefits.
Yeah, and part of my research was just the demographics. Even when I was just focused on manufacturing, they were running out of people, not just skilled people. They were running, period. Not enough people were around. So all of a sudden now it's people like myself leaving. There's 30-some million people retired that could have at least some interest in working. But companies are more open to saying, yeah, maybe we can make this happen than they maybe were before.
Well, and just one comment on that is I think there's a balance. And I think if you do leave a corporate job to go start something, give yourself 18 months, set aside the money, make a plan for 18 months, and don't be in a rush to say, another employer was knocking at my door 6 months later and I gave up on my dream because the money was too good to pass up. I'm going to make a commitment to 18 months and maybe longer if it's continuing to work. And then when it's no longer working, it's not a failure to say I left being an entrepreneur to go back to a company. That's not being a failure. It's changing your goals, or it's changing your desires, or realizing that the entrepreneurial life wasn't for you, maybe once you headed down that path.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, we've had a great conversation. As we kind of wrap up here, Kevin, any final thoughts? And then we, of course, will be sharing your links to your website or any links to anything you'd like to share with podcast notes. But any final thoughts?
I appreciate the time. This has been a great conversation. And I look at the time and it's just flown by as we're sitting there talking about this. And the idea that we can maybe inspire somebody who is sitting at a job right now that's saying, you know what, I'm not sitting in my ikigai spot where I love what I do and I'm good at what I do and I'm getting paid well. Maybe one of those three things is missing for them and they decide they want to step out and they want to try that encore career. So I love the idea that we're spreading that. And I hope we've inspired one person to think about that differently moving forward.
Great. Well, thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it. And have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Lynn. You too.
Again, many thanks to Kevin on sharing his journey and the help that he provides for people. Again, some of the topics we covered were why he left the 3 businesses that he had started, the lessons he has learned in creating now 3 businesses, one he's just started, how he uses LinkedIn to connect with both clients and business peers, along with other subjects. And in the show notes will be a link to Kevin's website so that you can contact him directly. So remember that with an Encore career, the rewards are great. You can work when you want, where you want, and do the work you love. As your coach, I'll help you go farther and faster based on what I've learned from being on this journey for several years. You have the time, attention, and money to make this leap, so let me help you. And if you're having thoughts about starting an Encore career, please contact me and take the self-assessment quiz. That quiz will help you get some quick clarity around what's possible for you in the future. And after you listen to the podcast, I encourage you to visit my website at linfrias.com and download the PDF, which will be a guide to help you take your next steps. Again, many thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.